A lot of times I will go through and find things that I'll record. I just can't stay up past a certain time. I record them. And some of the titles, you think, oh, this is going to be a great program. And then you watch it and you're really disappointed. I find that a lot of programs, especially those that are geared towards biblical discoveries and things of that nature, always have some twist in it. It just can't be, and it's very frustrating. So I recorded a program, and this was, I don't know, of the, I'm going to say at least 20 or 30 that I've seen over the years. This was another one of these theories on the Ark of the Covenant. You've all seen those programs, right? Right. And the lead-in to this program was, we think we have found the location. And this is old and it's silly because I've seen so many of these over the years. I once watched one of these where it was reportedly they had an ark that was in Africa somewhere. There's, of course, those that believe that the ark is in Ethiopia. But the one that I watched the other night is not of these theories. Let me go back to the one that they claim to have the ark in Africa, in this little village, and they brought out, it was supposed to be the ark, but obviously when you see what they brought out, it's not the ark. And there's no way that it could ever be the ark, not even in a recycled form. It's just not possible. I don't know what dimensions they were reading when they made that, whenever it was made. But the program that I watched was so nutty. And I was thinking, this goes back to every time I watch one of these programs. What happens to people who do not have any biblical frame of reference? And they watch this stuff and they think it must be true because they have no frame of reference. Now, it's kind of interesting because this particular program, they made a comment and they said the last reference to the ark is in Chronicles, which is true. Josiah tells them to bring the ark inside, place it in a certain place, and that is, we'll say, the last, apart from the book of Hebrews, we're talking about Old Testament. But it's almost like people seem to ignore the passage in Jeremiah 3. So every time I see one of these, it really bothers me that it's like these are Bible experts and they have, there's always somebody who's pontificating and waxing eloquently, and it's like, wow, this person sounds really knowledgeable. If you like wax, or I don't know. But I was wondering why is it? There's this fascination to find something. We know that when at the fall, 586, 587, the carrying away of Zedekiah, and basically the temple is looted. But if you read carefully in that account, it tells about basins and different items being taken out and taken away. It does not mention the ark. And just, I guess it bothers me that all of these people like to talk about the ark and the discovery of the ark. No one reads what Jeremiah 3 says, and Jeremiah 3 is, through the mouth of the prophet, God is just kind of letting loose. And if you read that whole 3rd chapter, they say, if a man put away his wife and she go from him and become another man's, shall he return unto her again? Shall not that land be greatly polluted? But thou hast played the harlot with many lovers, yet return again to me, saith the Lord. And you know, the whole call for the people to return. This is before ultimately they are carried away. There are many last calls, last opportunity, repent. But if you read beginning at about the 11th, 12th verse, and the Lord said unto me, the backsliding of Israel hath justified herself more than treacherous Judah. Go and proclaim these words towards the north, and say, return thou backsliding Israel, saith the Lord, and it will not cause mine anger to fall upon you, for I am merciful, saith the Lord, and I will not keep anger forever. Only acknowledge thine iniquity, that thou hast transgressed against the Lord thy God, and hast scattered thy ways to the strangers under every green tree, and ye have not obeyed my voice, saith the Lord. Turn, O backsliding children, saith the Lord, for I am married unto you. I will take you, one of a city, two of a family will bring you to Zion. I will give you pastors according to mine heart, which shall feed you with knowledge and understanding. And this is the key verse. It shall come to pass, when ye be multiplied and increased in the land in those days, saith the Lord, they shall say no more, the ark of the covenant of the Lord, neither shall it come to mind. Neither shall they remember it, neither shall they visit it, neither shall they it's not going to happen anymore. Why? He's talking about a future time. At that time, they shall call Jerusalem the throne of the Lord, and all the nations shall be gathered unto it, to the name of the Lord, to Jerusalem. Future time. There isn't going to be any restoration of that worship. And very simply put, just as God, by design, even though he told the people to repent, he removed the people. And we have the folks that say the people were lost forever, which they weren't, but just as God removed the people, there are certain things that were removed from God's program to, I believe, never be seen again. And you can talk about the Jews in Ethiopia hiding the ark, but believe you me, if they had the ark and it was the real ark, they probably wouldn't be hiding it. That's number one. The ark that was brought out in this program is definitely not the ark. The ark that was brought out from Africa is not the ark. In other words, if God really wanted that to be reintroduced, God has a way of preserving the things that he wants preserved to bring them again. But if you go and you read where they're ultimately, Zedekiah's been carried away and they are basically pilfering the temple and taking everything out of it, there is no mention. There's every single item that is being talked about short of the ark. Now, you can say whatever you want, it's gone. Just like certain people that were removed, God let that happen. And all of these programs are designed to, we should be thinking on these things, but the fact of the matter is that the Ark of the Covenant, because Christ has come in the flesh, is no longer needed anyway. What are you going to do? Bring out a box so you can, I'm sorry, it served its purpose before Christ came in the flesh, but what are you going to do? Bring out a box and worship a box? So there's never any thought on these things. It's always the speculation. We'll string you along for 30 or 40 minutes and drive you insane when we actually show you what we found. There's another dig going on that is at Kiriath Jearim, I think, presently. And why the interest is because this mound that they are digging at, somebody said, we have good reason to believe that when we get to the bottom of this mound, we will find the ark. That's interesting. Even though, this is like pulling at straws, even though that may have been the location at one time where the ark may have rested, doesn't mean that the ark's underneath a pile of rubble. There's all kinds of crazy things. If people will really read, God says that there isn't going to be the ark of the covenant of the Lord, neither shall it come to mind, neither shall they remember it. Future time in the restoration, when the two sticks are joined together to become one, there isn't going to be such a thing as bring out the ark and let us worship the ark. Because at the time of restoration, the only ark that's going to be worshipped will be Christ. It's always the missing ingredient in all these programs. No one ever wants to tie up the loose ends. So very frustrating. I don't know if you ever sat through some of those programs. They have one of the programs that I sometimes like to watch, but I'm more entertained by it. I think it's entertaining. I'm sure you've seen the program that has to do with aliens, right? I'm not naming the exact title of the program for good reason. I actually like to sometimes watch that because everything is a spaceship. Everything from, ancient statues of women's breasts or they're the guy's hair that talks, that's a spaceship right there. And some of the people, I just think, sometimes that's where drugs are good. But it really is, if there's some things that you just can't explain, that just, they do at times make valid points, and there is, again, that tapping into, we'll call it the mysterious, unsolvable. I was showing somebody a piece of a relief that just recently sold at auction. It's quite a large piece that sold for about $30 million, and in it has it's a Syrian type relief on it, and there's a little purse being carried, a little square purse. And how, if you look at a lot of the different cultures, you'll see that there's this common factor. I don't know why, but they're carrying this little purse, not just within that culture, but within other cultures. So there are things where you say, why is that? And that's peculiar, and there must be something there. But then there's other things like this, like I said, of the ark. I'm not sure why did I sit through another one of those programs, right? But it is still my responsibility, I guess, to take in and watch even the garbage, and you never know. But I still find it interesting that these programs are put out, and certainly the ones that, like I just mentioned on aliens, is very fascinating to people who are absolutely, unequivocally, they read the Bible, and Bible believers and heathen and people who are not involved in the Bible alike, interested in that subject. In fact, I remember when I used to travel to the prisons, and that was one of the programs, no matter where I went, I would get asked, what do you think about that program? Because they all like to watch it, because it taps into that kind of mysterious, unknown universe that no one can give you an answer. I mean, you can speculate and you can say there are these anomalies, but no one can give an answer. And here I think I give an answer. If God wanted a piece or a remnant to, or even the whole ark to be retrieved or returned or discovered, he has ways of getting people to the right place, just like when they uncovered the 5 porches at that dig, which they thought for a long time that location, biblically speaking, did not exist. And then they dug it up and they said, oh yeah, it does exist, it's right there. You can see it. And I think God has a way of guiding people to things that he will use, and other things that they're gone, and they're gone for a reason. They're not going to be useful anymore. Now, you think you touch on this subject and you think you've kind of wrapped your mind around that, but I noticed the pattern in archaeology and even in the manuscript discoveries. It's the same thing. God has a way of pointing people in a place and sending them off to make discoveries that then are going to be used later on to solidify or verify something, and other things that will never ever be seen again. Perfect case in point is, everybody's familiar with, Dr. Scott produced that wonderful Tischendorf Bible, but the finds at St. Catherine's Monastery, and the common, what people commonly know, the commonly told story of what was found there, because it's the most popular of all of the tellings of the various trips over a period of time that people made to that monastery. But maybe that's the most well-known. God pointed that individual in that direction to find and uncover what was considered discarded sheets of vellum that later became one of the most important finds to give us the most, we'll call it extant, or at that time, an old resource for us to say, yes, these documents are even older than we thought, or more reliable, going back and tracing out. And then God leads another person back to that same monastery, where you think they must have exhausted and gone through everything, to bring out another cachet, and another discovery is made. And then everybody stands back and says, okay, I guess there's nothing else to be seen here. I'm saying every angle that has to do with uncovering something, God has a way of sending people at the right time to uncover or to unearth or to bring forward, whether it's an archaeological discovery, or, as I'm talking about, manuscripts, and the things that are never to be found again, or they're man has destroyed, or maybe God has destroyed, and consider it part of the puzzle of things that probably aren't needed. We probably have thus far all we need, or all we need to know, and any more would be like saying, you'd probably doubt if somebody said, we found the Ark of the Covenant. It'd probably be the most debated artifact, because people have been searching for it, and probably by this time, if you think about it, if it is even still intact, it would still be one of those debated. It's not going to make somebody say, oh, now I actually believe because you found it. Like people talk about the Jesus boat, or, I mean, anything that is a visible clue into history. For somebody like me, it's wonderful, it's very entertaining, but I'm not going to put my weight or my faith on that. That's not what I'm basing it on. But back to my diatribe for a second because I was going somewhere with St. Catherine's. When everybody said there's no more discoveries to be made. And the two sisters that go off in the desert. It's a wonderful story about these two sisters. In fact, I've spent probably the last week kind of just rereading. I've got several different books on their journeys and some of the history that was chronicled and twisted by historians to caricature what their finds were. They actually went to St. Catherine's. They were probably considered by most silly women going across the desert in their day. They did something unprecedented in their time. They brought a camera and they photographed what one of the sisters recognized as one of the oldest Syriac witnesses, which actually was in a palimpsest form, so it was something that was written over it. Previously had writing, scraped off the ink, then they wrote on top of it, and as they were pulling these out of what they called the dark room, or the place where they had things hidden away, one of the sisters saw what she believed to be, and closer attention, realized they were looking at the old Syriac version, and put this version at their time when they were writing about this, putting this and predating it to Tatian's Diatessaron, which dates to 160 or 170. Now, whether or not that is true, that remains highly debated. But what they did is they spent a couple of weeks at the monastery taking pictures, photographing what they had discovered. And it's like God had a way of pointing these, first you've got one individual who comes and it's the Sinaiticus, and then you've got another one. Now, this discovery is made. So God has a way of sending people, just like I believe in archaeological discoveries out there in the desert. God has a way of sending people to uncover something, and it's usually because it will be something fruitful, not just another, we found another cache of stones or things that we can identify as pottery shards or something, but something that's significant to make a contribution. Yes, God has a way of navigating that. When people say to me, well, what about the ark? I just don't think for anybody who's reading the Old and New Testament put together that God has any need to bring the ark out, because the ark that we have is Christ. So you can take that however you want. And the next time I see another one of these tantalizing titles, Mystery, Ark of the Covenant, I'm going to record it and save it for a day when I'm excessively bored. And will have forgotten about the umpteenth versions of these programs that I have watched, as it's kind of a sad statement. But if you're interested, I love the story of the two sisters. Now there was a book put out about these two sisters and their discoveries, but I would tell you, if you have that book or if you're going to go find it, read it carefully, because it is written in an extremely warped fashion. It caricatures and makes these women look like, it makes them look stupid. There's some parts of it that it's the real telling of the story, but you have to remember at the time that these women journeyed off into the desert, and these weren't just, oh, we're going to go off to the desert. These were well learned. In fact, when they got to the monastery, they were told they wouldn't be received because they were women, and they probably wouldn't be let in because they were women. And what's very interesting is that they spoke fluent Greek. That impressed the priests that were at the monastery, not only two women traveling in the desert and making the journey, but they spoke their language. Hello, why don't you come in and have a cup of coffee with us? That's very interesting. Their father was a very wealthy man and widowed and traveled a lot, and the girls, when they were younger, could go with him on his travels on the condition that they would learn the language. That's a smart father. So they learned German and French, and I mean, they were very well versed, but they were also incredible Semiticists, both of them. One specialty was more in Arabic, and the other one just had a good overall understanding. And it's remarkable because if you even dig out the history of these two women, you find they were not allowed, they weren't taken seriously. They wanted to be admitted into the men's school, which was, university did not let women become students. Certainly the British universities did not. And you find this very determined mindset. Once the father died, they set off and basically they traveled, and it wasn't until much later that they went off into the desert. And then after that discovery made many, many trips, but at their first and initial discovery of the palimpsest, there's no telephone, you can't tell people right away, but they were in contact with what would have been the foremost scholar of Syriac, and he essentially becomes the father. If you buy any legitimate textbook on Syriac, Burkitt is kind of the father of unfolding the language. And she says, you have to come see what we found. No one would take them seriously. And after they even returned back with photographs, no one would even, they were stupid women taking pictures of something that couldn't possibly be. But she knew what she saw. In fact, she went back in her several journeys to leaves were stuck together. She used the steam to get the leaves apart. She had all of the good techniques in very careful way to be able to uncover what the palimpsest, what was underneath, and began her own translation when nobody else would touch it. It's a great, great story. If you ever want to read about some of you who probably have the mindset like me, I get inspiration from that because it doesn't take someone who necessarily was a foremost scholar. It just took a lot of determination and the will, and these women made the trip multiple times over and over again. But unfortunately, when they wrote their memoirs of these trips, one of the sisters wrote very candidly and told of some, we'll call them less polished things to say. In that day and age, they were taken out of context. And a lot of the things that were said of these sisters that just became perpetuated as absolute fact was nothing but fantasy made up by individuals who were just wishing they had gotten to those discoveries before these women did. So if you happen to be interested, I will probably drop a couple of titles here and there because it's a subject that I'm now kind of camping out on. But it's kind of interesting how God directs people at the right time, at the right place to find the things that He wants to bring out. And without those witnesses, if you think about it, all the discoveries that came out of that monastery. The Sinaiticus, of course, still remains at the forefront of, we talk about something that is a find, that is beyond valuable for our comparison. But the Syriac becomes an important witness for a different reason. It's obviously believed, and I'm of that camp, that many of those versions of the old Syriac were the versions that were being circulated in that, we'll call it a well-traveled corridor. When people talk about the Essenes and the Qumran and that kind of corridor, no one ever stops to think that the bulk of the people traveling, and we're talking about through the area from where these women traveled to the monastery, was a road highly traveled by Jews. And these were the converts, Jewish converts to Christianity, reading these witnesses, the old Syriac. So it becomes really important when you kind of see it as the tool of how complete communities were basically overtaken by the gospel message. You also have a wonderful example when people talk about things like the shorter or longer ending of Mark, for example. And that's been that long argued, where people will say, oh, well, that longer ending has to be somewhere. No, when you go back to look at those older witnesses, including the Syriac, you will find it missing because it's not there. And we know unequivocally that it was added at a much later time. And in fact, anybody who's reading that 16:9 forward in Mark's Gospel, it does not have, especially towards the end, it does not have any of the unity that the other Gospels have. So people have this perplexity of how could it end so abruptly? We have to find the missing piece that somehow will finish this off and make it come to a nice conclusion, but the oldest witnesses stop right there. So, it's all of those reasons that I say God directs the path for people to find things. And the things that are not meant to be found or rediscovered, I believe they'll remain covered by earth. Maybe in some cases, a lot of the booty that was carried out of the temple was melted down. Who knows? And quite frankly, I don't mean it to say who cares. They're important things. But when you consider that everything that was built, when David had the vision to build a house for God and was not allowed to build it because God said, you've too much blood on your hands, but Solomon was to build it, it's still David that gave him the instructions. It's still David that said to him, you're going to do this and you'll do that and you'll do it this way. And so even though it's not according to the tabernacle, there were still things that were types, or we'll call them a type, prototype, or a second type of the first, which we know the book of Hebrews talks about as a pattern that was set out. See to it that you build it exactly according to the pattern. Why? Because the very thing that was being built represented, it was a representation, not the actuality. So I'm not sure why we would go looking now for the representation when we know who the actuality is. If we're talking about the Ark of the Covenant, we have our find in the pages of the Bible telling us about Christ who's come in the flesh, who is our Ark, and who is our new covenant. So if you're into that type of stuff and you want to spin your wheels, there's programs all the time. I think I just saved you about an hour If you go look for the program, don't bother. It's like everything else. I just gave you the short version of it. Don't bother. But I don't know, it still is kind of fascinating that people won't read exactly what God's word says. He says there's future time, people, it's not even going to come to their mind. Think about that. In the restoration time, it's not even going to come to people's mind. If it was that important, God would say, and when the two come together, the ark will reemerge and be reintroduced to the people, and the people shall worship and pour the blood out or whatever, sprinkle the blood there. Doesn't say that. And there's good reason for it. It's too bad a lot of these scholars are not looking for answers in the Bible, at least the few ones that are really quite obvious and in your face. And I mean that, in your face. Get on the telephone.